management option under forestry, became a registered forester in the state of Mississippi, and then also an accredited wildlife biologist. Left there, met my wife, decided that's who I'm supposed to marry, ended up in Tennessee because she was living in Knoxville. I started working for the Tennessee Division of Forestry in 2004. I did forest inventory and analysis for a year, and then I was an area forester. I was in two areas, Cannon, Warren, DeKalb for a year. And then I went to Dixon, Houston, and Humphreys for the rest of the time until 2014, when I got an invite from Dr. Clatterbuck to come here to UT to work on my PhD, specializing in hardwood silviculture. But while I was at State, one of my main mentors when I did my master's there was Dr. Andy Ezel, who was pretty much one of the herbicide gurus in the Southeast. Learned a lot from him, and having him and Dr. Clatterbuck as mentors, I told the silviculture class, it's almost like divine intervention. I did not plan my path to be this way, but the stars aligned. The Lord made it that it happened, and I had the tutelage of two people that were the aficionados in what they do. And now I'm doing research. I have a lot of research going on looking at herbicide applications over the top of oak regeneration. I found some stuff that doesn't hurt oak, but I got up to 90% suppression of yellow poplar. That's a whole nother presentation on that, but that's a silvicultural bombshell, as I like to call it. It could be a game changer for how we manage upland hardwood stands. But anyway, tonight I'm gonna talk mostly about non-native invasives that you're probably going to see pop up in their openings along the field edges, your fence rows. We're going to see what they are and then how to put the juice of death on them to kill them. So let me see if I can get the screen share up here. Make sure I pick the right presentation too. Okay, so we're going to start about this. I'm going to come back to this slide later on. This was a study I did. I was also at Clemson for 4 years before Dr. Clatterbuck retired. And when he retired, I said that's a chance for me to get back to God's country and get back over here in the hardwoods. So I made my way back, but we'll talk a little bit about that study when it comes up. This is one that I think it was Chris asked me about this, gets a lot of call. I think it was Chris. One of y'all asked me about this particular species, autumn olive or Russian olive, which is an Elaeagnus species in the genus. You notice it's got the silvery underside of the leaves. There's some lenticels on the bark there. It has thorns in it, and it can potentially reach up to 30 feet. Now, at one point in time, TWRA pushed this plant as a wildlife plant, and it is an exceptional wildlife plant. It's so good that the birds love it so much, it just decides to spread everywhere. So they did a good job with passing that on and getting it out there, I guess. Alternate leaf arrangement, and I'm not going to go into too many details on all these plants. I'm going to get right to the meat and potatoes of it. But just some descriptions of what it looks like. It's got the long lanceolate leaves, normally 1.5 to 4 inches long, up to a 1/2 inch thick. The silvery underside I mentioned. And it's also got a drupe-like hard fleshy fruit, which I'll show you a picture in a second. And the animals and birds really like it a lot. This is also a non-leguminous nitrogen fixture. Now, some of the herbicides, in particular, imazapyr, which is Arsenal AC or Chopper, is not effective on leguminous species. This plant is not, however, so that will work on it. And I'll show you those prescriptions here in a second. There's what the fruit looks like. I mean, if I was a bird, I would probably want to eat it too. I can't blame the birds for wanting an attractive fruit, but that's what they look like. So you've got one growing up on the field edge there on the left. You got a couple of pictures of the fruit. There's a picture of those thorns, and then another picture of the leaves. So for the chemical control treatments, if we're looking at doing a foliar application, and this would be with a backpack sprayer or maybe a sprayer mounted on the side by side, a 60-gallon tank, these are the applications you could use. So when I say glyphosate, typically I'm referring to a 41% active ingredient product. So most of those generics out there, Cornerstone was one of them that I used a lot when I was running a consultant. I ran a consultant business also while I was doing my PhD work, and I did a lot of non-native invasive control treatments on a number of counties across the state, nothing in the far west. but everywhere from the Western Highland Rim all the way up to Mountain City, up in the corner up there, I did something to control plants at some point. But I'm talking about the 41% glyphosate. So the max rate is 3 quarts per acre. And I try to translate that into a percent solution. So typically when I spray an area and I'm using backpacks, I'm probably looking at about 4 fully loaded, so 4 gallons full per tank, so about 16 gallons an acre, typically. Now, if it's really large vegetation, I might bump that up to 5. But I tried to give you an estimate of what that would be as far as if you're just looking at what percent to mix in a tank. So that comes out to be about 4 to 5% solution of glyphosate. Now you can add triclopyr to it also, get up to 2 quarts per acre as a 3% solution. You're normally going to hit this anytime, most of the time during the growing season, anywhere from June through early October. You can also use, now there's 3 formulations of triclopyr. There's an ester, which would be Garlon 4. There's an amine, which would be Garlon 3A, and there's a choline formulation. That product trade name is known as Vastland. So you can apply Vastland. I think any of the triclopyrs would probably work, but this is what I found on the literature side. I've never used that product in particular, but I've used other ones on autumn olive. But about 1.5 quarts per acre, approximately a 2% solution applied at that same time during the growing season. If you're doing a foliar application, you're going to want to add a surfactant. Now, the time, and I've got a general rule of thumb, I'll tell you now and I'll tell you again, if you're doing it in the early growing season and you've got decent moisture, precipitation, you can go with a non-ionic surfactant. If you're doing it later in the growing season, late summer, early fall, and especially if it's droughty conditions or drier, I would say don't apply when it's a drought, but it's drier conditions, you're going to use probably a crop oil or a methylated seed oil. So the percent that you mix ranges. If you're using a non-ionic surfactant, you can use 1/4%. If you're using a crop oil or a basil oil, you're using approximately 1.5 to 1% solution. If we're doing basil bark, now basil bark is basically where we coat the lower 14 to 18 inches of the stem from the ground, and you want to coat that ground line real good because that's where a lot of those dormant buds are, where the coppice, the sprouting could come from, on up the stem, or a cut stump. So we sever the stump with a chainsaw and we treat that outer phloem or xylem out on the edge there, approximately where all the transport goes. If you're doing basil bark, you need to stick with the ester formulation of triclopyr. So this is Garlon 4, and we're going to do it as a 20% solution. And I like to add a penetrant. So Sidekick 2 is one. There's one called Fencerow bark. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about another research project I had at Clemson. But adding a penetrant definitely increases the efficacy of the herbicide. So I definitely want to add that in there. It's not an expensive product, and it will increase your kill rate. And then you're going to mix it in a petroleum product or a crop oil. I use diesel. I know some people may not like to use diesel for the potential effects that it could cause, but it works. You could use kerosene. If you're using a crop oil like a basil oil, that would also work. I've used methylated seed oil, doing some treatments on bamboo, which I'll tell you about those too. But one of those carriers, so not water, but one of those products. You can also use a Mazapure. Now, I like to use the 53% active ingredient as Arsenal AC or Peairs, which is a generic of Arsenal. And if you do that, you're going to look at 7 to 8% solution in one of those carriers with that penetrant also. One thing I'll say too about a Mazapure, we're going to talk about residual soil activity. Some of these herbicide products can persist in the soil and be active up to months, depending on the soil type, whether it's a sandy soil, a loamy soil, or a clay soil. If a clay soil lasts longer, potentially up to 3 months. So some of these products, like the triclopyrs, the glyphosates, they typically do not have residual soil activity. But a Mazapure, hexazinone, aminopyrrolid to some degree has some, and then your sulfonylureas, which is sulfametron methyl and metsulfuron, and we'll talk some more about those, but just be aware of that, and I'll come back. I'll talk some more about that. So bamboo, we got bamboo coming up. I played around with it a little bit. One interesting fact about it, it has histoplasmosis, which is a deadly lung infection in blackbird species. Now, you may not like blackbirds, but it does have some environmental effects. So if it's potentially could be found in soil of infected areas, so you'll want to avoid using a bulldozer or some type of heavy equipment if you have those species of birds out there. Just an interesting fact. If you repeatedly cut this and you prescribe burn it, it's not going to significantly control it. So we're almost going towards the chemical realm, which is normally my preferred method for silvicultural practices anyway, but it won't get it done if you just looking at fire and cutting. So some of the treatments on it, if you cut these large stems and you let it grow back up to about 4 foot, then you can hit it with a foliar spray. If you're going to do that, you have to up that rate of glyphosate up to about 10% in water, and then add that surfactant, depending on the time of the year, whether it's non-ionic surfactant or crop oil, or you can use Arsenal AC as a 1% solution. The double strength solutions of the herbicides, if you're going to cut those stumps and then treat the stumps. So just double those rates, 20% versus a 2% solution if you're cutting and treating the stumps directly. Velpar products, these are hexazinone. There's another product out there called Velosa. I played around with it some on some site preparation experiment I had on the coast in South Carolina. And I've done some stuff with it on the bamboo, which I'll talk a little bit about that. But they do have a product called Pronone, which is a power pellet, which is a hexazinone, and it can be done in a grid pattern also. But this is basically a soil treatment. So you're basically trying to expose the mineral soil and treat that soil at a recommended rate of 2 gallons an acre with that herbicide. So this was a study that I played around with in South Carolina. So I wanted to go into a stand. The lower two pictures are actual research sites. I wanted to go into stands that had established bamboo beneath an existing overstory. So if we couldn't get heavy equipment in there and cut that stuff and then let it regrow, could I do a basal bark treatment on it? Didn't find anything in literature on it, so I said I'm gonna put it in. So I put it in, and I've had one herbicide treatment. Now the treatments didn't show up. The browning of the leaves, which you see it in that right picture over here. Those are the stems that I treated in there that end up turning and dying. But it took about 120 days before I started seeing the symptoms, necrotic coloring of the leaves. So if you do the basal bark, which here's a good illustration of it here, we got a backpack sprayer loaded with the chemical formulation here, and we're treating that lower stem. You can add a dye in there to help show the stems you've already treated. It helps it stand out a good bit. But what worked for me was this hexazinone, which was the Velosa, at a 20% solution, added a 10% penetrant, that Sidekick 2, and then the rest of it was as a petroleum product, diesel, or a crop oil, which was methylated seed oil is what I used. Now, one thing that I will say about this, I did see flashback in the hardwoods over here on this side underneath. Let me see if I can move this a little bit. All these trees on the edge here, they did have crown dieback. So you can get some herbicides too hot if you're in a situation like this where it could affect that overstory. With pines, it probably wouldn't be a problem because hexazinone was developed for applications back in the 80s or maybe even the 70s for use in pine trees. One other thing I want to talk about, this picture up here in the upper right, this was an area that I sprayed on a John De La Howe Governor School of Agriculture in South Carolina. I went in and formulated a simulated mix of a product called Alstar, which they no longer develop, but it's a mix of hexazinone and sulfametron methyl, which is Alst XP. Those two together also worked pretty well on the. And there you go. There's spraying that basal bark there. All right, bush honeysuckles. These pop up a lot. I know I did some work over here on Knoxville City Parks. They were in some over here at Fort Dixon across the river in the understory. I've seen a lot of that in the Nashville Basin over there. It seems like it's all over the place over there. This is one of those problematic plants that can pop up. Prescribed burns will eventually get to it, but you're going to have to do multiple burns. You're going to have to wait for fuel load reaccumulation. So I would recommend that you go in and treat it chemically. These aren't eaten very readily by livestock or deer or sheep either. So again, to the chemical side. If we're doing foliar, we can use one of those 41% glyphosate products at 2 to 3%, and then add that non-onyx surfactant. And you can do this anytime during the growing season. From what I've read on most of the research articles, it's best to hit it when leaves have just developed before they harden off in late summer. But you can still get control of it in late summer. I've done some stuff in the summer and it worked pretty well. You can also use a traclopyramine. So this would be the Garlon 3A product at 3 to 5% solution, and then add your surfactant to that, and that'll also get it. If we're doing those basal barks or the cut stumps, traclopyr ester. So the Garlon 4 products, 20% solution, add that penetrant. Now, I've read a lot that says you don't need to add the penetrant, but I like the response I get when I add it. And then the rest in that petroleum or crop oil. Chinese Lesbediza. This is one that can come back up in the seed bank. If you burn it, it promotes the spread, and mowing will also increase the stem density. So again, need to go to the chemical world to get that good control. You can add fertilizer to pour nutrients, and that can help suppress it. It's a semi-woody leguminous forb, and it can reach up to 6 feet in height. Now, some of these Lesbedizas, if any of y'all are quail folks, there's some like bicolor Lesbediza that is a good quail food, but this one is known to have, it's normally avoided. And I think that they also don't really consume the seed very well from what I've read. It's also long lived in the seed bank. There was a spot over in Humphreys County that was state-owned property, and they wanted to plant some trees on it. Had tall fescue on the field, so we went in and sprayed strips with glyphosate, did subsoil treatments, planted it, and the next growing season, the strips we sprayed came back in this. So it was lying dormant in the seed bank, just waiting on the environmental conditions with that mat forming fescue grass to get rid of, to disappear, and then it emerged. So it can stay in that bank for a while. Looks like I might have deleted my slide. Metsulfuron methyl, which is Escort, and MSM 60 is a generic. It'll control it, and I think you can get it at as little as a ½ ounce an acre. Glyphosate will kill it, but if there's seed still in the seed bank, it may come back. So I like to use a soil active herbicide like Oust or Metsulfuron, Escort XP on top of it. I think Traclopyr would also work on it as like a 1% solution, but it's pretty easy to take it out. You just got to keep going on it and make sure you get it all, because it probably will come back to some degree. Chinese privet, formerly my most hated plant. Got some family properties in Louisiana, so all over the place down there. And until I battled rhododendron, which displaced it as #1, this was the most hated plant. This one will persist into the winter and it's a semi-evergreen, so it'll retain some of those leaves into the winter. And I'm going to say this before I forget it, because I don't think I have it in the slide. You could, if you had sensitive plants that you didn't want to kill, let's say oak seedlings on the forest floor, and you've got this growing in the understory, you could go in as a dormant season application when the foliage is still on, if you were going to do a broadcast application over the top with a glyphosate herbicide, something that doesn't have residual soil activity. Otherwise, you're probably going to be going in and either doing hack and squirt, that cut stem treatment, or basal bark application. All right, these form thickets, and they can get tall, up to 30 feet tall. When they get tall like that, if you're looking at it from a forest regeneration standpoint, you're probably not going to get stuff to grow through it. So you're going to have to take it out to get the trees that you want coming in there. Opposite leaf arrangement, leaves up to 1.5 inches long and 1.2 inches in wide. It's got that good lustrous looking green, kind of a glossy look, but it's pale underneath. And they are also shade tolerant. So they can grow in the shade in a closed canopy stand. They colonize by roots, and they also spread by birds, especially American robins, Turdus migratorius. They like to eat the seed and deposit it. If we're going in to treat it foliarly, glyphosate, and I've killed a lot of privet. And I've done it with clients that were on contract with NRCS as in the EQIP contracts. I've done it on private properties in Louisiana, family land, and a 4% solution will work on it. Make sure you add that surfactant in there, and you can pretty much take it out anytime in the growing season or in the dormant season if you want to try and avoid sensitivity, non-target plants. Triclopyramine, so this is that Garlon 3A or a similar product, 3 to 5% solution, and add your surfactant. Imazapure will also work at a 1% solution plus your surfactant, but I will say this. I played around in the woods spraying understories, and if you're in hardwoods and you spray this in the understory, you're probably going to see crown dieback and potentially mortality in some of your hardwoods. So just applicator beware on that. I've done it a time or two actually. Basil bark or cut stump. Again, the triclopyr ester, so the Garlon 4 product, 20% solution, add the penetrant, and then put it in that carrier, just like the other ones. And then if we're doing a cut stem, and this is a hack and squirt where we're using a machete or hatchet, cutting into the stem and putting a little squirt in from a squirt bottle, roughly a milliliter. I've always done it as a 20% solution in water. I'm going to show you something when we get to Tree of Heaven where they reduce the amount of flash back to non-target trees. But I would go with this rate. You might could drop it down to about 15% and still be effective, but I've always used this actual formulation there. English ivy had another treatment over on the Clemson Experimental Forest, and these two pictures on the left here are both from the treated area. And there's two forms of English ivy. You've got the ground cover, which most of us are familiar with, but if the trees get in there and it gets shaded, it could grow up and become aerial vines, like these two pictures here. So the picture on the right, we had a lot of trees that were infested, just like that one had. I think it had an average of 15 stems per tree, if I remember right. Common in urban settings, old home sites, it can be out there. And the problem with this one, it has a waxy cuticle, so that can reduce absorption into it. If we're going to treat it foliarly, so we have to up that glyphosate to 5 to 6% solution, and I would add a crop oil on this one. So you might even bump it up to 1%, but that crop oil helps with penetrating that waxy outer cuticle layer. So instead of a non-oxidant surfactant, add a crop oil. Metsulfuron methyl, so Escort MSM 60 at 3 ounces an acre. This is another one of those that can kill overstory trees. So if you're in hardwoods, pines are okay, but if you're in hardwoods, I would probably advise not to do it because you're probably going to see crown dieback and potentially mortality of individuals, even larger trees. So judicious use on that one. Cut stem. Looks like I left that one out. If we're doing a cut stem on this, use the Garlon amine formulation, the Garlon 3A, and I would probably do it as a 50% solution with water. If we're doing basil bark, I'd do a 20 to 25% triclopyr ester in that petroleum product, crop oil, and a penetrant. On that study at Clemson, I only had one effective treatment. I tried aminopyrrolid, which is Milestone, and there's another triclopyr product out there. It's a triclopyr acid. It's called Fencerow. I don't think it's a super new product, but it's a newer product that I hadn't heard of until I was at Clemson. And I got a 2.5 gallon jug from a herbicide distributor salesman that said, try this out there on some of your research. That formulation right there with the penetrant in diesel was the only one that worked. I got about 85% control on those vines of the picture I showed you, but the other treatments that didn't have, well, the main difference was adding Sidekick 2. So I got a lot better kill. Without it, I think I was around 30 to 35% control with just the triclopyr ester or acid in diesel. So make sure to add that penetrant.
Dr. Peairs, I got a question.
Okay.
Is on that English ivy, I get a call or two a year. Like you said, it was common in urban settings.
Yeah.
If we're doing that around, the hardwoods or around homes where there might be other landscape, we probably need to use that glyphosate treatment and just, not get on the desirables that are there. Would that be a best option for that English ivy?
That's what I would do. I would use the glyphosate. It's got the least residual soil activity. I did on my PhD study, I did see stunted growth when I tried to release some oak and yellow poplar seedlings in a clear cut, but it didn't kill them. It just stunted the growth. So
Okay.
you're probably going to have less what we call flashback with uptake of non-target species.
Okay.
All right, Japanese honeysuckle. So most of those triclopyr herbicides with a surfactant has a 1 to 2% solution will work on it. Glyphosate also does real well as a 3 to 5% solution. And just like the question you just threw out there, if non-target plants are an issue, I would use the glyphosate. The only problem I really have with triclopyr, and I've seen this when I was spraying in the summer, is the volatilization of the ester. And it can float up and be absorbed into overstory trees. So if it's really hot, you're supposed to avoid applications. Like when it's close to 90 or above, you want to probably go with something different. If it's cooler than that, say below 80, you're probably okay from volatilization. The escort, that metsulfuron at 2 to 4 ounces an acre, but again, beware of sensitivity with plants. If it's just a total infestation and there's nothing else there, no problem using the escort. Otherwise, I'd go with the triclopyr glyphosate. If you're going to cut the vines, if they're big enough, you could use the Garlon 3A as a 20% solution to just treat that outer ring. Kudzu. So we all know what it looks like. I don't need to describe it. Wet all the leaves. Now that John De La Howe Governor School of Agriculture, I did have some trials out there where I had 6 or 7 different herbicide treatments. I'm gonna show you some pictures, but I've got one herbicide that I think is hands down the best on it, but I'll show that in a second. If you're gonna do it foliarly, hit it late summer, July through September. You can use Tordon, which is a picloram product. If you're not around water, all the picloram products are restricted use herbicides. So you cannot put them around standing water, or if there's anywhere where you could get into the groundwater, you don't want to use the picloram. But you can do it as a 3% solution. I think at John De La Howe, I used a product called Pasture Guard, I believe. And it came back really well, mainly with Johnson grass, which isn't the most desirable, but it didn't hurt the grasses. So we were able to get a forage base, which they weren't running livestock on it, but it reclaimed the field in that section. But that's one of the options. Escort, I've treated a lot of kudzu with Escort, 3 to 4 ounces an acre. It has that residual soil activity, which could help because you have that underground tuber where they sprout back from. So you might can get some uptake inside that tuber in the root system by using that one. Milestone is the best. I'm going to show you a picture here in a second. 7 ounces an acre. It's an expensive herbicide, but you're not using much, and it's going to go the distance as far as how long a tube or a quart will last you if you are 2.5 gallons. If you use Garlon 4, you're probably going to get partial control if you apply a gallon an acre. I used, what was the product? It had triclopyr in it, but it wasn't one of the Garlons. I got pretty good control on the kudzu, but again, I would go with Milestone. And then if you're going to do basil bark spray or stem injection, I would use that ester formulation of triclopyr again. But if you're spraying around trees, so that top picture, that's clopyralid, which it does not affect, or it does take out lagoon trees, but most other trees are safe from it. So if you've got it growing on the field edge or inside of a tree line or that fence row, you want to take out the kudzu just in that area, clopyralid's a good one. 1 to 1.5% solution, so that's a 1 to 1.33 pints per acre, or that aminopyralid at 7 ounces an acre, but avoid foliage contact with desirable trees. The lower picture there, they had a number of white oak trees that were open grown in that field on John De La Howe. That is the only herbicide that I partially sprayed vines that were climbing up trees. We could reach about 10, maybe 12 foot with that sprayer we had, but it's the only one that killed the vine all the way up the tree. Every other time I treated kudzu, doing it for clients, I've had to go back, sever the stems, and treat the stubs. But aminopyralid, at least from that one experience, it was the best I've ever played with. So I would highly recommend aminopyrrolate, and that's Milestone is the trade name for that. Mimosa. So we've seen these. There's a lot of those in Middle Tennessee. I see a good bit of them there. This is a legume. So the arsenal won't work on this one if we're doing hack and squirt, but I'm gonna tell you what it will. They can reach up to 50 feet in height if they're really growing. Interesting fact about this one, the seed contains a neurotoxin, which could be hazardous to livestock. Just found that out today, looking through literature. So if that's growing on the fence line and you got livestock, you probably want to take it out. It's kind of like I guess similar to black cherry. It has digestive issues with the black cherry, but if they eat those dead branches, the seed can remain viable or stagnant in the soil for a long period of time, and it rapidly grows once it breaks out of dormancy. So that clopyrrolid that I showed you on the tree lines, the product, one of the trade names is Transline. There's a clopyrrolid 3 from Aligar down in Opelika, Alabama. They produce one. Treat it as a 50% solution. This is if you're doing a hack and squirt with roughly 3 to 4 inches between the center of the cuts. And you do this late summer, so July through the fall, November. You could probably do it into December too, but when it starts getting colder, I've noticed a decrease in efficacy of how well it works with control. Triclopyr, so the amine formulation, the Garlon 3A, same directions, 50% solution, 3 to 4 inches between your hacks with a milliliter inside of each hack. And if you're going foliar, you could do a 1 to 3% solution and then add that surfactant. If you're doing it in late summer, you're probably going to want to go with one of the crop oils, especially if it's dry. This herbicide can be tank mixed with a number of products: triclopyr, glyphosate, imazapyr, hexazinone, the sulfonylurea, so that would be the oust and the escorts. So it can be utilized as a tank mix to extend the range of control. I've sprayed that one over the top of natural oak regeneration inside of a shelter wood, and it didn't hurt any woody species outside of maybe legumes, but I didn't know that I didn't quantify the legumes on the study, but that's a pretty safe one on trees other than the legumes. And then your triclopyr ester, you can go in at 1.5 to 2% solution and add a surfactant to it also. Multiflora rose and some of these other non-native roses, we all seen those. They can form dense thickets in the understory. The rose hips or the seed are consumed by birds and spread through their digestive tract. They persist in the shade and they can form dense thickets. In the woods, I've treated a number of lands that had some of these. The last one I remember doing was in Jonesboro. Had a lot of it in the understory. And one thing I noticed about that plant, if you wait later in the growing season, it appears to lose foliage. And it was a problem for me that I had to go back and repeat the application because I don't believe I had enough active ingredient absorbed because I didn't have enough leaves. So if you're going to treat it, I would treat it probably earlier in the growing season, probably May, June, July, before, because it for some reason it appears to reduce its density of foliage. So if we're going to hit it with something, we're going to wet the leaves foliar. Escort, now this is a soil active herbicide. Again, in hardwoods, I wouldn't use that one, but if it's out somewhere on a field edge or somewhere, or maybe a fence line, if you want a real clean fence line, 1 ounce an acre will do it from April through June. You can use Arsenal, which is also a soil active herbicide. Again, I wouldn't use it under hardwoods. Either one of those is fine under pines or a Fencerow. 1% solution, April through September. Glyphosate, 4% solution, April through September. Probably going to have to do more than one application though before you get good control of glyphosate. Triclopyr, any one of those products, 1 to 1.5% solution at the same time. If you do basil barks, again, go with that triclopyr ester at 20% Garlon 4 solution in a carrier. And I've done it. I don't think you necessarily need to add the penetrant. If you have a bark species you're trying to target, like some of these woody vines or maybe woody hardwoods, if you're going in to do a site prep release for natural oak regeneration or something, I would use it for a bark species. But a vine, they're pretty easy to absorb, or these roses, so I wouldn't worry about necessarily adding a penetrant on that one. Nepalese brown top or Japanese stilt grass, Prescribed burning will promote the seed spread. You won't eradicate it with fire at all. In fact, you'll help it. I've killed this many times with just glyphosate as a 2% solution in water. And then you can add a surfactant, hit it in the early summer. You could probably do it late spring and still get good control too, but normally late summer. And then try and treat those plants when they're young. So hopefully before they really get real well established and before they actually form seed heads. Metsulfuron will work on it. Again, the hardwood warning. Sulfametron methyl will also work. Now, this one is safe on hardwoods, with the exception I've seen sensitivity with black cherry. But I mean, if we're managing fence rows, we probably don't want black cherry anyway, especially if we got livestock. But there's a number of products out there. The trade names: Alst XP, Spider, SFM 75, 2 ounces an acre, early March. So right before everything starts to break dormancy, you can put that out at that time. You can go in and hit it with a 2% solution of glyphosate May through October, but it's also probably going to need those repeated applications. You can go in with grass selective herbicides, so clethodim, phenoxaprop, or cetoxidin. I think the last one is select clethodim. Can't think of the trade name off the top of my head. And phenoxaprop, I think, is Gold 2XL. Effective as post-emergent sprays, so you could spray them after they've come out, and you can also add glyphosate to any one of those to extend the level of control. Oriental bittersweet, so this is another vine species. You could probably fit winter creeper in with this one also. As far as the treatment that'll control, they both have those waxy leaves, somewhat similar to that English ivy. Wet them with herbicides from late summer, July through October. The Garlon products are good, or the glyphosate, but you up it a little bit to a 3% solution. If I'm going to hit that with just glyphosate, I might actually bump that up more to a 4 or 5%. I've seen those waxy leaf plants, the Vincas also, I've sprayed some of those, and you need a little bit stouter cocktail to take those plants out to have those waxy leaves. If we do a basil spray, we could use that Garlon 4, 20%, or we could do stem injection on if we got large vines going up the tree. You could use Arsenal AC on that one. If you're going to do that, you could probably get by with a 15% solution in water, and pretty much one hack will probably do it unless you got vines over 3 inches. Then I'd hack them with 2. Royal Paulownia. So these trees, there's 2 different types of Paulownias. This is the one that's non-native invasive. There's another one that's more ideal for timber production. I think I can't remember the name of it. I can't remember the Latin on it. But there's 2 different Paulownias. This one is the invasive one that climb up to 60 feet in height and reach 2 inches or 2 feet in diameter. Opposite leaf arrangement. The heart-shaped leaves really stand out. They're normally 6 to 12 inches long, big leaves, and 5 to 9 inches wide. They'll be glossy, gray-brown, and they'll have lenticels on the stems with little white dots. Colonizes from root sprouts spread by the wind and water dispersed seeds, and is prone to invade after you have a disturbance. So fire, timber harvesting, storm damage with the straight line winds, tornadoes we have in the spring, they can come in and invade. That's what they look like. I've got a study site now in White County that's supposed to come back with this Royal Paulownia. It's going to have Tree of Heaven on it. It's going to have Chinese privet on it. I'm going to have poplar in there, and I should have oaks, both planted and natural regeneration. I've got a couple cocktails I want to try on it. I think that I gotta find out through research, but I think I found one that worked on the poplar, and I have a theory that some of these faster growing species with these really rapid rates of growth, like poplar, the Paulownias, the Tree of Heavens, I have a feeling they may be more susceptible to some herbicide, where oaks are more conservative on how they grow. But I'm going to try that. I'll have to let y'all know how that turns out. We're going to install that maybe in April, do sprays in May, and then do post-evaluation 60, 90, 120 days after the treatment, depending on when I get out there. If we're going to do a cut stem, Arsenal works well on it as a 20% solution. And again, that's 1 milliliter per hack. And you do 1 hack for every 3-inch increase in diameter. So if it's 3 inches or less, 1 hack. A 3 to 6 inch tree, do 2 hacks on opposite sides. 6 to 9, 3 hacks on alternating sides. If we do triclopyramine, so this is the Garlon 3A, we do it as a 50% solution, 3 inches between the center of the cuts. Basil bark, again, the Garlon ester is a 20%, just like the other ones. And I would add the penetrant because it does have some bark to it. And then if we're doing a foliar spray with glyphosate, hit it with a 4% solution and add a surfactant. Imazapyr can be used at a 1% solution with surfactant, and then your triclopyr products as a 2% solution. I think we're getting to the end here, so y'all done well. Tree of Heaven or Atlantis. So this tree, I don't think there's been a piece of property, and I've been on in Tennessee, and I've been on literally hundreds of pieces of property all over the place that did not have Tree of Heaven somewhere on it. Deciduous tree, 80 feet in height, up to 6 feet in diameter. That job I was telling you about in Jonesboro, it had a patch of them where I think some straight line winds had laid trees down, and they were massive trees. Had to ring girdle them and put herbicides inside of those cuts. But they can get big, and a mature tree can produce up to 10,000 seeds, which can really spread through an area, and they also spread by rhizomes and the rootstock, or by rootstock. Pinnately compound leaves, circular glands underneath the lobes, kind of similar to a walnut, heart-shaped leaf scar. Have a strong odor. Some people say they smell like peanut butter, but I think that's an offense to peanut butter because they smell terrible. Peanut butter smells good. And then they have alternate leaf arrangement, and they're even pinnately compound. So this was from a study done up at Penn State. This is a roadside. Y'all probably seen this in the Nashville Basin if y'all go through there along the sides of the roads, dwarfing the guy that's spraying the stuff there. Rapid forming, and they can grow dense stands just like this picture. They are shade intolerant to a degree. I've seen them somewhat grow in shade, but typically they got to have the sunlight. They have allelopathic tendencies, which means they release chemicals into the soil to suppress other vegetation that grows around them. Colonized by those root sprouts fed by wind. And then the seed are produced on plants as soon as they reach 2 to 3 years of age. So they are reproductively viable really quick in life. There's the leaf scar, the heart-shaped leaf scar in the middle, the bipinnate, the compound leaves on the other two plants. And this picture over here is a little blurry, but you can kind of see the red stems on it. Kind of look like sumac to some degree, but if you break one open, you'll smell the odor and you'll know the pungency comes out. So there's a number of things that we can treat them with here. So there's a 26.7% active ingredient of imazapyr. That's the chopper products. And then the 53.4% is the Arsenal and the Peairs. You can hit those with a 0.5 to 1% solution and get it out with a foliar spray. I would do that in the latter half of the growing season. So probably August, September, October. If you hit it with glyphosate, keep it a little high at the 4 to 5% solution and add a surfactant. I would add a surfactant to the imazapyr as well. Same time, you can do it with the triclopyr products. You see the rates there, or the ester, the rates there also. Drier periods of the year, use that methylated seed oil or a crop oil as opposed to non-onyx surfactant. If it's wet, it's not as much a problem. But if those plants aren't transpiring, they're going through moisture stress, they're probably not going to open their pores as much to where they can be absorbed. The herbicide can be absorbed into them. On the hack and squirt, let me move this over. Arsenal works really well on it. One of the studies I saw, flashback is when we have indirect uptake of adjacent trees by trees that we treat. And this study looked at reducing the amount of active ingredient down to 5 to 10%, and they got good control with 1 to 2 inches between the cuts. So they're not spacing them as wide as when you do a 20%, which is 1 hack for every 3-inch increase in diameter. These are closer cuts, but you also have less amount of active ingredient you're putting in each tree. So I don't know when it boils down to the end how much different as far as the amount of active ingredient you're actually putting out in each tree. But they appeared to say it didn't have as much flashback potential as if they were using a 20%. July through November on that. You can also use the Garlon 3A or the triclopyr, which only has 1 R in it, but I misspelled it. 50% solution. Or you can use Toradon product, Pictoram, Pathway, Tordon RTU means ready to use. If you use either one of these, use it undiluted. So you don't mix it with water. 1 milliliter per cut with 1 to 2 inches between the cuts, and you can do it in the same time of the year. If you have stems greater than 6 inches diameter, then I would recommend breaking out the chainsaw and do a double ring girdle and maybe put herbicide in the lower girdle. Or you could do a double girdle with no herbicide. But if you're doing tree of heaven, it's going to come back from root sprouts, so you better add the herbicide. If you sever those stumps, you need to treat them as soon after stem severance as you can before they compartmentalize and kind of cauterize that. I don't know if that's proper terminology, but make it to where that herbicide can't be taken into those plants. Avoid treatments during droughts or if the temperatures drop below 40. Move this back over. If we do basil bark on tree of heaven, that triclopyr ester, again, the same formulation, 20-25% in one of those carriers, petroleum carrier or basil oil. I would add the penetrant because there might be a little bit of bark to it. You can do these basil barks in the dormant season on a lot of tree species. It kind of opens a wider range of windows of when you can get out there and do stuff. And you don't have to worry about ticks and the heat and everything else as much. But just make sure if you do it, that it's not close to freezing. I probably wouldn't do it below 40 degrees. And then avoid the drought times if you do it late in the year. Picloram plus it should be 2,4-D. That would be I just said it on the last one. Let me go back up. The pathway in the Tordon RTU. You could do this as a 2 to 3% herbicide. Tordon 101 would probably also work. And then that milestone will work on it also. So that would be the aminopyrrolid 5% herbicide with a carrier. So you could actually use the milestone as a basil bark on that tree. Kogan grass, I was asked to add this in there. This is an invasive that's starting to get into our state a little bit, especially those southern counties. The germination rate is approximately 5%, so it can come back pretty quick. It spreads by rhizomes more so than the seed, so that's what makes it troublesome. Fire's going to potentially spread it and cause tree mortality, kind of like this picture here in the middle. As far as wildfire danger, it could lead to more intense fire. The rhizome shoot can puncture thin rubber tires, and there you see the rhizome here, that spike that's coming out. And this will be in bloom from April through May. So it kind of looks like Soteria, which is foxtail, which is a desirable native plant, especially for doves and some of the songbirds. But it'll be a big fluffy plume tail. You see a carpet of this out there, it could be Kogan grass. This is what a mat of it looks like in the dormant season, growing underneath the pine stand. So if we put a fire through that, it's going to get hot. We're probably going to get a lot of crown scorch, and we could lose the stand. One time I burned a stand of pines, and it got really hot because there was a lot of slash. It was after thinning. Most of the crowns turned brown, except there's a little bit of green in the top. They came back. They may have lost a significant amount of growth that year, but just recognize that could happen. If you treat it, you're going to probably have to have at least 2 treatments before you get good control on it. If you're doing spot sprays of clumps of it inside of an area, like an acre or so or less, that 41% glyphosate at 3 to 4 quarts an acre, which is approximately a 4% solution in late summer, so August through October. If you're doing site prep or it's inside of merchantable pine, you can use that Arsenal or Peairs at 2 pints an acre, and I would add glyphosate to it and apply that in the early fall. Same rate, that 4% solution. If it's growing in loblollies that you planted, 54% imazapyr at 6 to 10 ounces an acre, and then add a surfactant and apply it in late summer. This doesn't really apply for us much, but I put it in there just in case somebody was listening to us from a coastal state. If we've got slash or longleaf out there and they're seedlings, we drop that rate of imazapyr because they do have some sensitivity to imazapyr late summer, and do not add a surfactant because that will help with uptake, and that could lead to damage to those trees. If those trees are over 2 years old, 12 to 14 ounces an acre without a surfactant. So you can up it if they want to get a little older, but again, don't add the surfactant. This is the last one, I promise, I think. Giant hogweed. This is one of those new plants that's coming in the east. It's got some issues with it. It has phytotoxic causing phytophotodermatitis in people. So skin rashes, some severe allergic reactions. From what I've understood, it's mostly in northeast Tennessee, can reach heights of 16 feet. It kind of looks like a giant ragweed, sort of, with those leaves. Reddish purple splotches. You can see it on this picture here on the stem. Coarse white hairs. Flowers in 3 to 5 years and 20,000 seeds on average per full grown plant. Hit it in the early stage when it's only got 2 to 3 leaves on it. Seems to be the best as far as the research is out so far. Triclopyr ester, so that Garlon 4 at 55 ounces an acre, approximately a 2% solution. Piclorama also work on it, Tordon 22K at 15.4 ounces an acre. And then you can also get a pre-mixed product called Clearview, which has aminopyrrolid and metsulfuron methyl in it. And you just need 2 ounces an acre for that. For glyphosate, slightly less control as those above, but it did work to a degree at 25.7 ounces per acre. I had to convert the metric to English, which I hate having to do that, but I had to do it a lot because scientific literature always does their manuscripts in metrics. But anyway, approximately 1% solution. I would advise to increase it a little bit if you want to really gain a little bit of better control. Those come out of a thesis out of Ontario, Canada. I guess that's one of the first places it landed. So here's a breakdown of all the herbicide that you can use on top of that hogweed, glyphosate, and pretty much everything I just said. That's the amounts in table for. Some considerations. I talked about flashback already. Here's that picture of the bamboo stand. And you can see how I got crown dieback along the edges. The trees on this side are healthy, but these right along the perimeter that probably have roots that extend inside of this bamboo, they probably had some uptake and they're being affected. So if you're out there and you think that you're treating, let's say you're treating a tree that could have root grass, if you're using those residual soil herbicides, so the imazapyr, sulfonylureas, hexazinone, picloram is also soil active. You could get flashback. I've seen it on a Clemson study in swamps. I had a rep on Savannah River Swamp, the Wateree River Swamp, and another floodplain up near the North Carolina line. And I saw indirect uptake inside of various species of trees, 3 primary ones, but just be aware of that. So think about that when you're out there applying and what you're going to select for your herbicides, depending on the application and what your sensitive plants are. If you're in a bottomland or a flood prone area, picloram's out of the picture because it is a restricted use with water areas. And the sulfonylureas also have a tendency to move a lot in the water, in the soil profile. So the Oust and the Escort, SFM 75, the Spider, you don't want to use those in those bottoms either. And then the last little thing here on weather, avoid applications during droughts. You're going to have lower uptake of the herbicide by the plants. Make sure the air temperature is right. So I say below 60, really 40 is probably the max threshold. But typically we want to be in that sweet spot somewhere between 60 to 80 degrees, but definitely not above 90, especially if we're using that ester formulation of triclopyr. And beware of potential rainfall. And we're talking about rain fastness with how long that herbicide needs to be on the leaf surface before it can be absorbed. It varies by herbicide. It could be anywhere from an hour on up to potentially 8 hours or more, depending on what we're using. But that really plays into summer pop-up showers. Had it happen on a research site over in South Carolina, and pretty much the herbicide treatment became ineffective because it rained within an hour after spraying. But be aware of that. So look at those weather forecasts, and then also high wind speeds to avoid drift, non-target impacts from drift landing on outside of your spray zones. Proper use of appropriate surfactants. I said at the beginning of this, I've got a video on surfactants, and it includes everything from ammonium sulfate as a water softener if you've got hard water, emulsifiers, the non-oxidant surfactants, the penetrants, the whole gamut of everything you could use, but you need to make sure to use the right one. And the general rule for everything I said here, if we're doing early growing season, normal precipitation, use that non-oxidant surfactant. But if it's late summer with dry weather, go to your crop oils like the methylated seed oil, etc. That is it. You survived. So
Dr. Stephen, you throw a lot of information at us. I'm glad we recorded this thing.
yeah, I know it.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
But I also thought when you was mentioning that farm in White County with all those different invasives on it, I thought, man, hey, he's been to my mom's farm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's a nonstop battle. I think every landowner in Tennessee is probably going to have to battle something because they're everywhere now, and it's really restricts what from the forestry standpoint. I told students today, if you go out there and you're looking at a stand and there's invasives in it, that's going to be the first thing you need to address, especially if they're in the understory, because if you cause a disturbance, timber harvesting, they're coming back and they're coming back with a vengeance. So you better be ready. You better have your pistols ready and sling that juice of death as quick as you can.
We got a question, Jason.
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat. Dr. Stevens says, I have a wisteria species that is popping up from the ground and trying to spread to my pastures. I've tried glycinate, but didn't seem to kill it. What would you recommend?
Aminopyrrolid, the milestone. So there was an area at John De La Howe where we had thin pines, and I was trying different herbicides underneath that canopy on it. It had the wisteria in it. It did well on it. It's also on the label. So I would go with that milestone. Milestone, I was hoping it would control English ivy, but it didn't do anything on ivy, but it'll take out wisteria. Trying to stop sharing here. There it is. There we go.
Anybody else got any more questions for Dr. Stephen while we got him on here?
I just want to tell him thank you. I appreciate all the information he laid out there. Is there's a lot of those weeds, you talked about them in a little different setting, but almost all of those hardwoods is what we're trying to kill in those fence rows. I know privet, where I live, I'm up and down the creek banks, and that privet drives us nuts. And that
Yes.
bush honeysuckle, and I had questions the other day, guy cutting out a fence row, and I was in the local co-op and asked me about privet, so I get that all the time.
Yeah. Somebody had asked about cedars at 1.2.
Yeah.
Because that's one of them that's out there and needs control. So Picloram, now not all the Picloram products, but I think Tordon 101 will control it as a foliar spray. And I believe it may have been Crenite with metsulfuron. That Escort, I think, was another cocktail that might control cedar. That's one I need to dig on a little bit more. I've looked at it a little bit, but I can't verify for certain. But that was one I probably should have put in. It's not a non-native.
And I want to mention, I know you mentioned the Triclopyr product. There's a lot of generic Triclopyrs, and then a lot of our pasture guys are probably familiar with Remedy, which is
Yeah.
And it's very similar to the Garland 4, I think, if you look at the percentages. So
yeah, that's the one I sprayed on the kudzu study at De La Howe.
Okay.
That's the one I couldn't think of.
Yeah.
Now there's also some aquatic products out there. I didn't mention that, and I don't know that anybody would be dealing with bottomland situations, but the rodeo is the aquatic glyphosate, and there's an aquatic triclopyr out there also. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. But if you're in a situation like that where you're restricted with water, those would be the options you'd probably lean towards. Is there any other questions? Looks like there's 5 chats here. See.
Yeah, and I will make a comment while we're looking at the chat is if there's anybody that need pesticide points, if you didn't put your chemical number in there, if you're a commercial applicator, we got commercial applicator cards, you can put your name and put your commercial applicator number in there, and we will make sure that you get registered and signed up and get your points for viewing the meeting tonight. But make sure you put that in the chat box so we know that you need those points.
I don't believe anybody's got any more questions. Dr.
That's
Stephen, you did a great job. We really appreciate it. Jason, you got any announcements about the next one we've got coming up?
Yeah, March the 5th, we've got one, Mr. Brent Jones with, Greenpoint Ag will be doing, baleage do's and don'ts. I'm actually going to host him here in Trousdale County, but we're going to be, showing it via Zoom, just like tonight. We'll be having him present, just talking about baleage, and there's a lot that goes into that if you've not done it. Not just, the types of species and how to do it, but also making sure your equipment's ready, because it's a lot of work in a short period of time when you're doing baleage. And so that's what I'm asking him to talk about, how to make sure everything's ready to go and what you need to do to get ready, when you're working with baleage.
All right. Dr. Stephen, we really appreciate you again. Like I said, we appreciate all the work you've put in for this, and it was definitely, I know it helped me.
Well, thank y'all for inviting me, and I enjoyed it. Anytime I get to speak, I get a little more famous, right?
That's
Hey.
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm
That's
sure
it.
glad we got it on recording where we can go back and watch it when I get these questions now. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But at some point, I may have to formulate some kind of UT publication on it too.